This is a Mamiya RB67 film camera, circa early 1980s. My thanks to Jim Hoyle for loaning it to me. I'm going to be doing some film photography with it today. First thing to notice, you look down instead of through the viewfinder. This is, I believe, a 50mm lens. Absolutely everything is manual. Mark Robertson is here to work with me. Mark has used film most of his life. I have always been a digital photographer. This will be very interesting, to say the least. This camera is a Mamiya RB67. Very similar to the one that I borrowed from Jim Hoyle. The primary difference is that this has leatherette attached. Other than that, essentially the same camera. Let's take a closer look at the anatomy of this camera. As I mentioned in the actual video, this is the viewfinder. Inside the viewfinder is a magnifying glass that enables you to see clearly what's coming through the lens. It wasn't as difficult as I thought. Looking down, I didn't find it particularly comfortable either, but given the fact that the Mamiya is extremely heavy and was on a tripod anyway, that seemed to mitigate some of the issues associated with looking down. This is the actual release for the viewfinder. You can replace the viewfinder with a different kind. There's a similar button on the other side. The film card must be removed or the film will not be exposed. I had that in my back pocket. I was a bit nervous, to say the least, because if that gets lost, then when the film back comes off, there's no way to protect any potential film. Obviously, if the whole roll has been exposed, that's less of an issue. However, with new film, that would be a problem. This is the mirror lever. Before taking an image, the mirror must be cocked, for lack of a better word. This is the lever by which you do that. I don't know what it would be like on a regular basis. I assume it would be easy to adjust to having to cock the mirror. Of the roughly 6 photos I took, I think it was one time I forgot to do that. No big deal. Cock the lever, move on. Not visible here are bellows. The bellows are used for fine tuning focus. Once again, not a big deal, and I'm sure that over time you would learn how to control that very, very quickly and also very accurately. Initially, because it moves so far with each small section of a turn of this knob, I found myself second-guessing myself. But again, over time with the right experience, that should not be the problem. And finally, here's the shutter release. Kind of a strange place, but like every other aspect of the 6.7, I'm sure that over time you would be able to learn how to use it. So let's look at some of the facts surrounding the RB67. RB is short for rotating back, and in fact you can carry as many backs as you want with the camera with different types of film. You can also rotate the back 90 degrees if you want to use the entire length of the film for a vertical shot. I didn't try that. I stayed mostly horizontal. Actually, I stayed horizontal the entire time. There's something about having a roll of film and knowing you have a limited number of photos. The camera was originally released in 1974. According to Jim Hoyle, this one is sometime around 1980. The 6x7 format is about 30% larger than a 645 medium format camera, which would mean it would be about 60% larger than a full-frame DSLR. Even more so if
you have a cropped sensor in your digital camera. 110 and 220 film, basically 10 and 20 exposures. And as I said, it supported multiple backs. If you carried multiple rolls of film with you and you had multiple backs, then you could potentially load different film in different backs and change them on the fly. Remember, we take for granted the ability to change the ISO, or as it was known in the days of film, the ASA, simply by changing an option in our camera. That was not possible here. So if I left the studio with a 400 or 800 ASA film and found myself in an extremely bright and sunny area, then I'd want to switch to a 100. That would be a matter here of making sure the film card was in and changing the back. So what did I learn? Well, first and foremost, I have a renewed sense of respect for photographers prior to the digital world. Remember, I never shot film, not until now anyway. I can only imagine what it was like for people like Eugene Smith to work in a combat zone if we used a light meter at the falls, and we did multiple times, to make sure we had the right exposure. What did someone like Eugene Smith do in a combat zone? Or George Horrell, or Irving Penn, or anyone who used film? It must have been a much more time-consuming, disciplined task. I consider myself to be a fairly patient and disciplined photographer, but the discipline and patience required in film far exceeds anything imaginable in the digital world. Yeah, how did they do what they did? Once again, imagining George Horrell or any combat photographer with a film camera in a combat zone, unable to use a light meter. Or if you think about what it must have been like for Ansel Adams in the field in a very complex scene using the zone method along with a light meter. Even the art of using a light meter, I watched Mark. It's quite a process, and it takes, again, quite the discipline. Stop, think, adjust. I more or less do that in the digital world. I say more or less now because with film, it is really a much more deliberate, intensive, focused, disciplined process. One that dwarfs the way that I usually approach photography. I will say that since I've been using vintage lenses, I've had to slow down considerably. I've had to do much more adjusting and thinking. But even that doesn't begin to rival what's required to get a good image in the film world. It is a very different way of being in the moment. I think the entire time that I was working, in my head, I also knew I had a limited number of images. 10 in my case. I also knew that I had a very limited amount of time to stay focused before the light would change and I'd have to get another meter reading. I also knew that I would have no idea what I was going to ultimately get. A film camera is considerably more limited. I don't have the range of shutter speeds. I can't change the ISO on the fly. I am basically limited to the design of the camera, which by modern standards is extremely primitive. As a consequence of that, there was always, I'm not sure how to describe it, a bit of anxiety, a bit of heightened anticipation, some excitement for sure. Again, I've never shot film, but in the end, you're alone and you have one shot. There's really no way to go back. If you want to take the same image over again, you can, but that's one less image on the roll of film. So, overall, a very good experience. One that connected me with generations of photographers before me, and one that has made me even more interested in shooting film. Maybe one day soon, given my vintage Pentax lenses, I'll actually buy a Pentax 6x7. Anyway, thank you for listening, and thank you for being a part of this project. We'll talk to you soon. If you want to contact us, we can be reached at NyghtFalcon.com or our magazine site, nightvision.com. And if you want to email me directly, you can reach me at inspiration@nightfalcon.com.